Previously in Nomifactory, I had expanded the chemical regime of my space factory TM rights reserved, which allowed me to achieve the achievement known as nanocircuits. This unlocked several things such as insane voltage tier machinery, and the fabled nuclear reactor. But there was one major plot twist even though this story has not even begun. These nuclear reactors were entirely customizable, and the quest for the nuclear fuel pellets would involve realistic nuclear enrichment processes that would lead to trouble if done in real life. And if anything went wrong, there would be explosion green screen sound effect. The fission reactor was constructed out of rather advanced materials that needed high amounts of energy and rare materials to create. But how advanced? One of the materials was the high-temperature superconducing crystalline chemical yttrium barium cuprate, which needed extremely high temperatures to cook. And what better heating apparatus than coils made out of materials found in Home Depot drill bits? The high-speed steel type G, abbreviated as HSSG. For some reason, blast furnace coils made out of drill bit materials were capable of simulating higher temperatures than real materials that actually made sense, but no questions asked. HSSG was mixed from molybdenum and vanadium and chrome and a mix of tungsten steel. It is then smelted in a tungsten steel coiled furnace for a rather long time. So while I was waiting for the materials to smelt in order to unlock smelting a new material, I decided to invest into insane voltage machinery to assist me in building the fission reactor parts. It may appear that insane voltage machinery only needed tungsten steel as its base material. But this was an uncommon misconception. It also needed polytetrafluoroethylene and styrene butadiene rubber. Luckily I had already synthesized polytetrafluoroethylene from methane and fluorite from the moon, which were combined with a 5-step chemical total synthesis and stored in this drawer of PTFE. So this means that the next thing I shall do with petrochemicals is create the styrene butadiene rubber, aka slightly brown rubber. As the name implies, it consumes butadiene. But as the name doesn't imply, it also requires benzene and ethylene, both of which I had anyways. The benzene and ethylene is conjoined to create styrene. And this styrene was further reacted with butadiene along with a hint of oxygen to create exactly 41 exactly medium-sized powders of the raw styrene butadiene rubber variety. And once this is stirred with sulfur, this suddenly becomes a molten raw liquid, which has to be tamed into a solid sheet of this beautiful advanced rubber. This was good news because the old method for getting rubber was visiting Earth and deforesting this entire rubber plantation for a few measly stacks of resin to be compressed into pathetic normal rubber, which was evoking the emotion of annoyance. But now, I can make rubber from oil and chemical blah blah blah, with no trees involved. So I went to the cable making machines of the base and tore out all of the auto-crafting patterns responsible for making cables, since they still used normal tree rubber. I then replaced all of them with auto-crafting patterns that consumed styrene butadiene rubber instead. As it turns out, one styrene butadiene rubber can cover 4 normal cables, while one normal rubber can cover only 1, aka 1 normal 1 cable times 1. The styrene butadiene material was also the only rubber capable of insulating cables that were insane voltage or above, while the PTFE is the only plastic that can make insane voltage machine hulls. So after grabbing some tungsten steel and putting it the bender and then the assembler, I created the insane voltage casing. Next I wired some tungsten wire and covered it in PVC and styrene butadiene, which was assembled with the aforementioned casing along with molten aforementioned PTFE, to finally assemble the first insane voltage machine hull. The basis of all insane voltage technology. Now the next step is assembling insane voltage machine parts to join this hull to create machinery. Whereas extreme voltage machine parts were made of titanium, canthil and aluminum, insane voltage parts were made of tungsten steel, tungsten and graphene. I already possessed copious handfuls of tungsten from the Tier 2 multiverse mining missions, but graphene necessitated graphite, which for now was only available on Earth. This could only mean one thing, which was several things. I returned to the surface of Earth, where I returned to a graphite vein that I found a few months ago. I then approached its location with velocity. This was followed by then mining everything around me to get hundreds of graphite ores, which were then sacrificed in the ore processing area to extract as much graphite as possible, since I would need enormous amounts of it for insane voltage machine part. When graphite is mixed with carbon and silicon, graphene is obtained. I then coded auto-crafting patterns for graphene wires, tungsten steel parts, and insane voltage cables, so that I could now craft insane voltage machine parts on demand. To go along with this, I upgraded from the measly medium voltage extruders to the slightly less useless high voltage extruders, so that it was now able to work with tungsten steel and other hard alloys. Besides machine parts, the insane voltage machines also needed insane voltage circuitry. Previously, the only available insane circuit was the ridiculously expensive mainframe. But since I invented nanoelectronics, I could create nano supercomputers instead. The main difference is that while this was simpler to manufacture, it needed lumium wires and NOR gates from silicon wafers, both of which I already had, as of 2 seconds ago, which was the timestamp at which I created the NOR gates. Due to this information, this theoretically meant I could now create the nano supercomputers I needed, which became a reality. But then, disaster struck. Not only did I need high-tier machine parts and circuits, I would need high-tier glass. Apparently normal glass wasn't enough to survive the insane technology. I would therefore need polyvinyl butyryl laminated tempered glass. So I did some research on my new enemy. I then got some bad news and good news. The bad news is this only needed 8 trigentillion chemistry steps. The good news is like and subscribe for more videos. Before beginning this chemical preparation, I would first build several high-voltage chemical reactors and a high-voltage forming press to handle all the gaming involved. The reacting begins by combining some basic carbon, oxygen and hydrogen together to create acetic acid. This acid is then reacted with even more oxygen and some ethylene from the oil refinery to brew some vinyl acetate. Even more oxygen is thrown on top of this to create the poly version of vinyl acetate. Meanwhile, I had to create my own artificial pollution by burning coal with oxygen for the sole purpose of harvesting carbon monoxide. This is then conjoined with hydrogen and some more oily chemicals to spit out the liquid known as butaldehyde. In the penultimate step, this is mixed with poly version of vinyl acetate to lead to the rise of a polyvinyl butyryl, which shall be solidified for further use. And by further use, I mean this was sandwiched between 2 tempered glass in this forming press, to make a singular laminated glass. The moral of the story is that the oil chemicals were extremely overpowered and could be used to make approximately 75% of whatever I pleased. And just when I thought I could finally create some insane voltage machines, I had a funny idea. Chlorine is one of the most used compounds in this household. And you may recall that our sole, primary, most important, utmost significant, source of chlorine is electrolyzing salt from salt ore. The issue with this is that salt ore was not enough to feed all the chlorine-hungry processes. The most important one being etching circuit boards, which was draining all of the iron chloride known to mankind. But then, I had an idea to solve this global chlorine crisis. Earth's oceans are broadly bigger than salt ores. Earth's oceans are also made of salt water. Salt water contains salt. Salt is sodium chloride. Chloride is chlorine. Chlorine is chlorine according to the identity property. So in my artificial neurological brain I was formulating the plan to extract practically indescribably infinity amounts of chlorine straight from the practically indescribably infinity large saltwater ocean. This plan would need a fluid drilling rig to drink called the saltwater. After checking my storage system, it appears I still had enough titanium and common metals to build all the rig components needed to build the advanced drilling rig, which was a repeat of everything I did for the first rig. I would also need ender tanks to transdimensionally transport to bring the salt water to the space station, and high-voltage centrifuge to extract salt from water and electrolysis chamber to extract chlorine from salt. Now for the actually hard part. Since I was lazy, Rather than constructing a new power grid, I planned to use this pre-existing earth power grid to support the new saltwater drinking system. Unfortunately, this was nowhere near saltwater. Unfortunately, moving it could mean the oil drilling rig shall no longer drink oil. So I would have to find a new location that has an oil deposit right next to an ocean, so that the same power grid could support two different drillers in saltwater and oil. After going on a Minecraft manhunt for the oil ocean complex, I located one with a fluent prospector, which was only a few thousand blocks away. Now that the new spot was spotted, I annihilated the old air collection and oil collection facility, and moved the entire thing to the oil deposit in the ocean. I then extended the power line further towards the saltwater deposit, and enacted the second fluid drilling rig above the depths of the delicious oceanic liquids. It then activated and promptly began pumping out buckets upon buckets of the saltwater. This saltwater is then centrifuged to get pure salt, while leaving behind water to be obliterated, while the salt is electrolyzed, leaving behind sodium to also be obliterated, since I already had tens of thousands of sodium from clay anyways. What was left was chlorine, which shall be intercepted by this ender tank with interdimensional channel color-coded white-yellow-white. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of miles above Earth, the player known as I go by lots of names, known as me, had set up the second ender tank to access the chlorine in the white-yellow-white channel. I had already obtained 64,000 milliliters of chlorine from the offshore chlorine bank accounts, which was a feat that would have taken 3 years with the old salt method. With this, the chlorine revolution was completed. Now that practically infinite chlorine was flowing through the veins of my monstrous space station, the sounds of chemistry and industry and economy and society were heard all around me, which includes making ridiculous amounts of iron the third chloride to etch as many circuit boards as I so desired. With insane voltage accoutrements, infinite chlorine dupe, and polytetrafluoroethylene, it was time to begin the acquisition of the nuclear reactor. I used some platinum from nickel processing, some tungsten steel, and some nano supercomputers, to create the insane voltage assembling machine. And by now all of the HSSG ingots had been smelted and were sitting in the matter energy system. Meaning I could finally construct the fabled high-speed steel coils, out of wired ingots, with some spare tungsten alloys sprinkled on top. The invention of this rather trombone-colored #D28558 coil would be followed by a major blast furnace revolution. Currently I only had 2 extreme voltage blast furnaces with tungsten steel and nichrome coils. But I created this new 16 amperage extreme voltage power grid, which made each furnace reach insane voltage. Meaning they could do whatever they were doing, 2 times faster. And I unlocked new smelting processes that demanded insane voltage. Next I created some new blast furnace parts ranging from inverheat-proof casings to inverheat-proof casings, to build a third blast furnace that utilized the new yellow coils. And to continue the tradition of using inert gases in furnaces to boost processing speed, this new furnace shall use argon from air distillation, rather than helium or nitrogen, since argon was specifically needed for higher-tier alloys. This includes infamous superconductor yttrium barium cuprate, the active ingredient of this stripy red plate, needed for the nuclear reactor. But not only that. The materials I needed to smelt included hard carbon, ferroboron, tough alloy, and tungsten. I already had profuse numbers of tungsten and steel. But the elements I lacked included yttrium and barium and boron. Just kidding. I already possess nonsensical amounts of yttrium. Several weeks ago, when I was extracting neodymium from centrifuging rare earth, I got 5 other random elements that I didn't care about. But now, I suddenly cared about them. Because yttrium was apparently one of those randoms. And when I was extracting salt from salt ore in the old days, this gave an ore byproduct of borax, which can be split into several random powders, including delicious boron. The only thing left to do was obtain barium, which was a byproduct of processing barite ore, which I could simply buy using leftover mine coins. Now it was time to combine all of these elements into the arbitrarily designed nuclear reactor alloys. Diamond plus steel equals hard carbon. Boron plus steel equals ferroboron. Ferroboron plus lithium from clay dust equals tough alloy. Yttrium plus barium plus copper plus oxygen minus pronunciation skills creates yttrium barium cuprate, which is smelted in the 50 ml argon gas high-speed steel G5000 Kelvin overheat-proof insane voltage super blast furnace of doom. Now it was time to wait for the blast furnace to do its thing. That was when a major realization was realized. What was the point of having a nuclear reactor when I had no nuclear reactor fuel? The most basic fuels available to me were thorium or uranium-based fuel pellets. So it was time to obtain both. First, it was time to create a system capable of extracting thorium from the environment. But why get thorium when I could get infinite thorium? According to detailed analysis, by using a few extreme voltage centrifuges, electrolyzers, pulverizers, and rock breakers made from dissimilar extreme voltage machine components, I could get infinite thorium out of thin air. To start this off, I traveled back to Earth just so I could get this singular piece of black granite. Back on the space station, I went to the ore processing quadrant of the resource floor to create a new extreme voltage power grid, with an extreme rock breaker as the first machine. This required a lava and water source block adjacent to the mechanism, and a seed block in the actual machine. This will cause the contraption to instigate concocting more of that block using the lava and water. This infinite black granite is then crushed for a small chance of thorium. And infinite times small chance equals infinity as well. But we're not done yet. The crushed black granite is then centrifuged to get biotite, which can be electrolyzed for practically infinite fluorine for even more polytetrafluoroethylene. But there was one problem. This raw thorium was not suitable for direct reactor use. According to detailed analysis, real thorium is made up of only 99.99% isotope thorium-232. So this thorium will have to be further centrifuged to extract pure 100.000% thorium version 232, which can be turned into our first nuclear fuel pellet, TBU fuel. Now that I had sufficient isotopic funding for TBU fuel, it was time to obtain uranium fuels. But unlike thorium fuel, uranium fuels needed a mix of two isotopes, which include the uranium-235 and uranium-238 version. Explaining this requires some uranium lore. The 235 version of uranium is far more active and radioactive than version 238. But the 235 version only made up 1% of all known uranium. By enriching this 235 version to about 10% of a fuel pellet, it will become suitable for nuclear exploitation. But to enrich it, we will first have to separate uranium ores into different isotopes to recombine them, which would require even more extreme voltage chemical reactors, centrifuges, and electrolysis chambers. Surprisingly, I still had enough titanium and aluminum to build all of this. The first step in enrichment is to react the uranium ore powder with hydrofluoric acid to create rather toxic uranium hexafluoride. This is then centrifuged to get massive amounts of depleted uranium and Lilliputian milliliters of enriched uranium. The depleted uranium can undergo electrolysis to get the pathetic uranium version 238. And the enriched uranium can be split into the radioactive uranium-235. Both of these separations return 100% of the fluorine that was consumed at the beginning. So it can be re-reacted with hydrogen to return my hydrofluoric acid. Notable mention: this process is actually used in real life. Do not use this top-secret classified information to create nuclear weapons in reality. Now for the fun part. These two isotopes could be interpenetrated to create various fuel pellets such as Lu-235, meaning lowly enriched uranium-235. By using a higher ratio of radioactive material, the fuels could be highly enriched for even more power. Using different uranium isotopes in the fuel will result in it being named after different random number above 230, which will result in making different kinds of nuclear waste, which will be explained later. Unfortunately, in the current state of society, The only elements that could be reacted were thorium and uranium, because anything more intense was unhandleable by my reactor's measly cooling statistics. In the meantime of all this fuel explanation, I had smelted all of the rare alloys needed for nuclear reactor plating. Nuclear reactors had 4 parts: the outside casings, the fuel cells, the coolers, and the moderators. The self-explanatory fuel cells hold the nuclear fuel to initiate nuclear reaction. Therefore, more cells means faster fuel usage, meaning more power. But a higher fuel usage equates to higher heat production, which has to be countered by coolers to ensure that this entire thing doesn't go up in radioactive fiery explosion green screen sound effect. And moderators are optional blocks that increase fuel efficiency, meaning less fuel is needed for more power. So I am going to make moderators. The tungsten, steel, and tough alloys are combined with robust tungsten steel casings to build the outer casings. This is supplementarily conjoined with yttrium barium cuprate and hard carbon to make the fission reactor controller. Some more tough alloys and glass shall be used to construct the fuel cells and coolant holders. And the coolant holders have to be stuffed with various different materials ranging from lapis to blah blah blah, for different coolers with different cooling statistics and placement rules. Luckily the quest book already told me exactly what to make and exactly where to put them. So brain usage was avoidable for now. The final ingredient for the reactor were these graphite blocks, which shall moderate the inner machinations of this place. And now, I was truly worthy of getting my own reactor. It was time to build the reactor ball. This ball shall be located in the nuclear quadrant of the base. And this ball shall be a 5x5x5 rounded ball with an inner volume of 27 cubic Minecraft units. And it shall have fuel cells in all corners. The coolants shall be sandwiched in between the fuel cells, and the moderators will be sandwiched in between the coolant sandwiches. Once this was completed, the reactor was sealed shut, entombing all of the doomed reactor components. The universe's second nuclear reactor, after the Oclo natural fission reactor, was now built. And it was hanging onto the space station by a few wires. Theoretically, if this were to fall over Earth, it would be like a radioactive coolant-filled uranium-filled meteor impact, causing approximately 0 deaths because I was no longer on Earth. The first nuclear trial shall commence with the thorium pellet. Due to me playing on normal mode, radiation was completely disabled. So any nuclear activity was safe. Alert. This does not apply to real life. Anyways, the whole point of making nuclear reactors was not to make energy, since this produced an amount of energy that is known as extremely small compared to my real generator. I only use the reactor to produce nuclear waste, which can be processed to find new extremely toxic but very yummy elements, such as various neptunium isotopes, which was the forgotten element in between uranium and plutonium. The used thorium pellets contained uranium, meaning that even if I ran out of uranium ores to destroy with acid, I could simply use thorium to enrich matter into new elements. Now all that was left to do, was rinse and repeat, with the infinite thorium fuel source. Speaking of fuel source, TBU wasn't the only thing I could stuff into this nuclear sphere. These different fuels would give different products after becoming nuclear waste. And the good news is that this layer nuclear waste is the first method of extracting plutonium, the most infamous and dangerous nuclear element. It also led to the discovery of a new uranium isotope, isotope 233, which I didn't really care about. With just black granite, I had gone from stone to infamous plutonium. But why do I care about plutonium if it doesn't make trillion bajillion energy? Because it can be used to make infamous plutonium fuel pellets. Indeed, fuel pellets could be made out of any radioactive element beyond thorium. These heavier fuels would create heavier nuclear waste, leading to even heavier elements, leading to even heavier fuels, creating an infinite cycle of upgrading elements all the way up to deadly red californium and also every other isotope before that, all of which would be needed for various exotic purposes later on. But this wasn't the only use for plutonium, because exactly 2 of it will be needed to eventually create a far more powerful nuclear reactor. The fusion donut. The quest for the fusion donut shall continue in the next episode, where I shall be recreating quantum computers in Minecraft. Like and subscribe and comment and notification bell. And shout out to the channel members of the past.